that the number of outpatients run over by ambulances has more.
Said the water, which is poisonous, was harmless unless drunk.
The fire devastated 4 stories, including the latest by author J.K. Rowling.
The species could be extinct as early as next week.
And there's been swift reaction around the world to American intelligence reports which suggest that the South
American Republic of Bolivia may have acquired nuclear weapons.
Meanwhile, in a statement from Downing
Street tonight, Prime Minister Tony Blair called for
concerted reflection, describing the news from Bolivia as
profoundly nuclear. Our worldly affairs correspondent Sam Henman has been
looking at the background to today's developments.
We know that Bolivia has nuclear weapons, or at least we think we know it has. But the questions remain, is it a threat? Should we be concerned? Just how dangerous is the situation? And just how unstable is Bolivia? Well, let's take a look at the facts. As a nation, Bolivia was involved in numerous wars, particularly between the 15 and 1800s. In the 20th century, it was plagued by military coups, dictators and economic crises. Bolivia hates Chile. Leading Bolivian novelist Ernesto de Souza described the country as a kind of scary, drunk, crazy man who would kill you if you looked at his face wrong. While the head of their nuclear program is described in some quarters as...
Welcome to Lookout East with Phil Kerdridge and Sarah Holt.
The thumping headlines from around the region where you are tonight.
Ipswich is officially named as European City of Violence for 2007. We have the reaction.
Angry protests as Norfolk police announce controversial new measures to crack down on dogging.
And concern as a report out today suggests that plans for 3 new wind farms across the region may mean that parts of Suffolk could simply run out of wind. All that, and Russ is here with the weather, aren't you, Russ?
Indeed I am, Sarah.
Now, wind farms, Russ. Good idea or bad?
Well, I'm not so sure, Philip. I'm a bit of a solar panels man myself.
There you go. You see, trust our Russ to be at the cutting edge.
No flies on Russ.
Hey, now, let's not go there.
Got a couple installed up on the old roof a few years ago now.
So you're living for free now then, are you?
Well, got to get them wired up yet.
Oh dear.
Still.
There's always something.
Oh, there's always something.
There's always something.
More from Russ later.
Yes, indeed.
Now, dogging. A few years ago, hardly any of us...
Coming up.
You're watching ESN News with Katie Tate and Richard Pritchard. Stay with us.
Still to come, as Bolivia denies claims that it has deadly nuclear weapons, we go to Los Angeles for reaction to news of the latest things.
Stay with us.
And coming up, we've a roundup of all the news still to come.
All that still to come.
Stay with us. But first, are wigs becoming too big?
Thank you, Sarah. No real hiccups on the roads at the moment. The only major incident we've heard about is on the A848, where the overhead matrix is apparently indicating to motorists that the road is fog-bound, which it isn't, and luckily they're ignoring it, so traffic is freely moving normally. Out onto the roads now. This is the A35415 approaching the Concrete Greek, and as you can see, a very light flow, traffic flowing very lightly. The A5650 at the Horse's Eye, again much better than you'd expect really at this time of the week. The traffic light's going red there, but apart from that, very little to contend with really. The A222, Howard's Way.
That the Bolivians may have been trying to throw international observers off the scent by disguising themselves as Russians, importing Russian military hardware, Russian hats, even Russian trees, in an effort to hide what was actually the Bolivian.
Seems to have happened next is that Hancock, having tried and failed 3 times to shoot his mother, eventually made his way out into his yard, where, in an apparent attempt to commit suicide, he turned the gun on himself, but missed, instead shooting dead his neighbor's horse, which was grazing in an adjoining field. When the neighbor in question, 67-year-old Clarence Lippincott, who had a history of heart problems, heard that shot and came out to see what had happened, he collapsed, later dying in hospital after suffering a cardiac arrest. This is Miles Anderton for IBS News, Defiance, Ohio.
Miles Anderton there with that sad story from Ohio.
That is unlucky, isn't it?
Anthony, it is. You kind of don't know who to feel sorry for.
You don't know who to feel sorry for? I'll tell you who to feel sorry for, the horse.
You're watching IBS News with Julia Reagan and Anthony Markovitz. It's 10 after 5.
You're out in your field, you got the sun on your tail, maybe a little grazing, you're thinking to yourself, you know what? It's good to be a horse. Next thing you know, some guy with a squint blows your brains out. That's a bad day, even for a horse.
I guess it's another one of those stories that calls into question our gun culture in this country. It's 10 after 5.
Also, you got to think, if you're a depressive, I mean, if low self-esteem is your thing, why, the last thing you want to do is to try to shoot yourself and miss.
Yeah, it's a question. Right now, though, it's time for Alicia with the Worldwide Weather-Wide Update.
Julia, thank you.
What do you got for us, Alicia?
Anthony, you are going to love this.
You know I'm ready.
Believe it or not, if you're in Manakapuru in the Amazon basin, Africa right now, you're looking at rain for the 110th day in a row.
The 110th day. This is the weather for the Bible, right?
Well, not exactly. If we look at the satellite picture, the reason is this large
A116 pointing dwarf, clear northbound and southbound. A456 pelican trombone. As you can see, nothing to say. A72, the whiplash lady, not much to add. A501.
From Bolivia itself. Meanwhile, in a statement from Downing Street tonight, Prime Minister
Tony Blair called for concerted reflection, describing the news as profoundly nuclear.
Stay with us for a further update, plus more reaction on that story. But first, it's time for a reminder of what it is. We can go live now to Washington and to our Washington correspondent,
Colin Kavanagh,
who's in Washington. Colin.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Adam. What more can you tell us?
Well, Colin, there's been swift reaction around the world to today's news. What's your sense of how people are assessing what the mood is there in Washington tonight?
Well, here in Washington, of course, it's still early afternoon. It won't be tonight until much later. But I think the best way to describe the reaction here is to say that people here are jumpy. I met a senator, Senator Tom Durskin, earlier, a highly respected Democratic senator, a tall man, a seasoned campaigner, not a man you'd normally associate with jumpiness of any kind. And he told me that earlier in the day he'd run into Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State, a woman, of course, and someone with a reputation for being able to keep calm even when everybody else is hiding under the table, and that she was looking twitchy. She herself apparently told him that she had seen Donald
and the perils of latex. All that coming up later on Film and Movie News. But first, a special treat for movie lovers everywhere. An exclusive interview with Alan Cameron.
Alan Cameron, thank you so much for joining us. It's an honour and a privilege. I can safely say you're the greatest director of our age, and it's a special moment in my life to finally meet the man who changed the face of cinema forever. Watching your films made me realise the power of the cinematic art form. It made me realise that it is an art form. It made me want to be involved in that art form. In fact, it changed my life.
Well, and it's now looking increasingly likely that Ilya Pariyevich is going to make a hostile takeover bid for Benderlex.
Wow, that's going to be rattling the cages down at HQ, isn't it? This guy's scarier than rattlesnake soup. If he does go pirate on them, they know they're only a spit and a lemon away from being stripped off like a lazy goose. Shouldn't they be doing hoofy double time on this one?
Who was himself looking more than usually jittery, had a meeting with the Vice President Dick Cheney. Someone who's generally regarded as something of a rock here in Washington, a man who's seen everything and had just about every heart attack going, and that Mr. Cheney was what he described as jerky when they got onto the subject of Bolivia.
By the time you'd made your third film, every major Hollywood actress must have wanted to sleep with you. Every major Hollywood actor probably wanted to sleep with you. Every major Hollywood director was probably prepared to...
Coming up, has Brazil ceased to exist?
Are we hallucinating more than we think, or do we just think we are?
Stay with us.
Coming up
shortly.
So if you are thinking of going tree climbing, it might be worth taking your cardigan with you because...
Unless you're a hay fever sufferer, of course, in which case you should probably just stay indoors with your windows firmly shut and possibly your eyes as well, because...
You also have the greatest beard of any living director. It's...
A415, Giant's Cleavage. As you can see, traffic moving freely, but backwards.
To help quash suggestions, we've been hearing that Mr. Bush has in effect, as one former White House aide described it to me earlier today, gone raccoon on Bolivia.
Colin, thank you.
Colin Kavanagh there in Washington.
That report from Colin Kavanagh.
This is PBS News with Adam Lockwood and Francis
Walsh. A reminder now of the story you've just heard about. There's been swift
action around the world to American intelligence reports which suggest that the South American
Republic of Bolivia may have acquired
nuclear weapons. President Bush described the development as a bad day for...
Sanguine, vibrant, reinvigorating, witty, eclectic, passionate. Your pasta sauce really is one of the most amazing...
It's the small minority of highly visible, hardcore doggers we're targeting, and what we're saying to them is quite simple. The days when you could just come out here and stick anything into anything else, regardless of the effect on others, are gone. You will be caught and you will be prosecuted.
Detective Inspector Barry Hansford of Norfolk Police, thank you.
Not a problem.
Well, clearly an issue here which stirs up powerful emotions on both sides. But for the moment, it's back to Phil and Sarah in the studio.
Penny, thanks. Penny Watson there with that report.
Well, fascinating stuff.
Certainly is.
I must say I can't see the attraction in it myself.
Well, it's like everything else these days. It's a young person's game.
I hesitate to ask this, Russ, but have you got any dogging stories?
No, the nearest I've come to that is my wife and I once found ourselves on a nudist beach in Portugal.
Oh, look out, here we go.
I should have known.
Do you know, it was rather pleasant, actually.
As usual with our Russ, the mind boggles.
Don't go there.
Too late, I'm afraid.
I have to say, it was on that particular holiday that our daughter Imogen was conceived.
Right.
Well, so all in all, not a bad holiday, really.
Moving on, perhaps.
Yes, please.
Yes, indeed. Moving on, moving on.
More from Russ later.
Surely so.
Now, as plans are unleashed for 3 more wind farms in Suffolk, concern is growing that ordinary residents in parts of the region could end up facing a wind shortage. Nick Andrews has been...
Alan Cameron, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure and a personal highlight of my life. I can die happy now. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Alan Cameron there. From the moment he burst onto the scene with his stunning debut, The Big Team, I've looked forward to each of his new releases with feverish anticipation. Then, 5 years ago, came The Waverers, a masterpiece of inanity, signalling he'd lost it completely. Since then, I look forward to each of his new movies about as much as an anorexic looks forward to a fry-up at a fat friend's dinner party. Each new offering seems worse than the previous and about as welcome as a group hug in a burns unit.
But how do we know that Bolivia may have nuclear weapons? Well, a body of evidence has been building up. First off, local surveillance showed evidence of construction in remote areas. Then there were reports that Bolivia was buying uranium, the raw material for a nuclear bomb, in bulk off the black market. There were the leaked government documents outlining the country's nuclear bomb-making program. This satellite photograph clearly shows what looked like nuclear warheads being transported across country. Rumours circulated that government ministers were looking to buy second homes. Nothing unusual about that, you might think, but these second homes were several miles underground. The government then issued a statement denying that it had any nuclear weapons. This was considered by many outside observers to be a clear sign that they did have nuclear weapons.
Full coverage of the game on our sister channel, Go Sports 1-2 from 6:30, with pre-match build-up beginning 24 hours earlier on Go Sports 1-3, 4 hours of post-match analysis on Go Sports 1-4 straight after the game at 10, and full interactive multi-angled replays on Go Sports 1-5 from midnight Wednesday to midnight Friday. Should be good.
Certainly should.
I'm Anita Rajaptani, and this is 15 Seconds in 15 Seconds. The headlines are sour. Oops, Britney's done it again. Selcook says I'm number 1. And sport, it's all over. That's it for now. More later.
A324 hardcore interchange there. A325, that'll be the stunted Mexican.
To be issuing a bulletin on the condition of the little girl, and of course at the moment they're not saying what they mean by little, in about a couple of hours' time. Ben.
Ben, thank you. Between 1 in 5 British children below the age of 7 is failing to meet the national average. That's the message Tony Blair will be hitting home in a major speech he's due to make the day after tomorrow morning. We can go live now to our Westminster studio and our national failure correspondent, Ben White. Ben, what do we know about what Mr. Blair will be saying exactly?
Well, Ben, I have to say, not a great deal more at this stage. Our Government Initiatives correspondent, Ben Green, is at the Department of Education. Ben, what can you tell us?
Well, Ben, this is going to be a major speech for Mr. Blair. We already know that. Now, if for some reason that we don't know anything about yet, Mr. Blair failed to make that speech, and I should emphasise that at this stage there's no earthly reason why he should fail to make it, but if he did, he'd be handing his opponents, both in the Tory party and the increasingly vocal minority within his own party, a huge slice of political fruitcake.
Ben White in Westminster, how likely do you think that is to happen?
Well, as Ben was saying there just a moment ago, Ben, at this stage, really not very likely at all. Ben Green at the Department of Education, what's the feeling there on the ground behind you about this?
Well, very much as you were saying, I was saying only a moment ago, Ben. At this stage, you'd have to say this is only the remotest of possibilities.
So in that sense then, Ben, the omens for Mr. Blair are looking pretty good.
Oh, I think so, Ben, yes. But as is so often the case with omens, we'll have to wait and see. Ben.
Ben, thank you. Ben.
Ben, thank you. Still to come. In America, President Bush has reacted strangely to reports that Bolivia may have been...
True or not, few would deny that Barry Shipley is one of the most colourful managers around at the moment. Guy Batson went to meet him.
Barry Shipley's team, Cutford United, may not sound like a military superpower, but he's a manager on the march who's declared a long, slow blitzkrieg on the table. Using his two chief weapons of blood and guts, Shipley has dragged Cutford up through 4 divisions in only 2 seasons. And last year took them on their best cup run ever, very nearly leading them all the way to the first round. Barry Shipley and his team have been involved in a long line of violent episodes both on and off the pitch. But do war and football really go together? I went to meet the scariest man in sport to find out. Barry, thanks for joining us. I hope you're not going to bite me head off.
No. I leave that kind of thing to Bobby and the lads.
Excellent, excellent.
Still to come.
It's official. Sex is good for you. A new report suggests that regular sex is better for you than being unhappy.
And cowboy burglars. We have the misery.
All that still to be coming up. But first, here's Melanie with the standing news.
Richard, thank you. I'm Melanie Bellamy, and this is the Standing News. Around the globe tonight, world leaders are trying to come to terms with the astonishing news that Bolivia has acquired nuclear weapons. One of the poorest countries in South America, landlocked on all sides by other countries, and surviving only as a result of its export of cocaine, natural gas, and torture. It's perhaps the last place on Earth you'd want to have a nuclear missile fired at you from. Right now, it's also an almost impossible place for normal journalists to report from. But our correspondent, William Gilliam, has managed to get to a phone in Costa Rica. Bill, what can you tell us?
Melanie, the picture here is very confused, and I have to say that here in Costa Rica today, it's very difficult indeed to get hold of any news at all about anything to do with Bolivia.
Bill, we're hearing reports that there's now a total news blackout in force in the capital La Paz and the surrounding area.
Well, Melanie, that would certainly match everything I'm not hearing on the ground here.
Bill, without wishing to speculate, what do you think would happen if...
But while you're asleep, things are happening. Important things. Things you should know about. If you don't know about them, you're missing out. That's why we go around the world. Through the night, every night. Whether it's darkness, we bring illumination. Where there are things happening they don't want you to see, we show you them. Because the news never sleeps. Neither do we. Neither should you. You're watching PBS News 24/7. All day and all of the night.
It's amazing just how many Ford Mondeos there are out there.
Bringing the game into disrepute. So, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, is this the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning of that end for Barry Shipley and his men?
No, well, yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't know what Churchill's been saying, so I can't really comment on that.
What about your captain taking a fan who asked for an autograph and repeatedly smashing his head in a doorway?
Yeah, well, certainly, you know, that's not the kind of thing you expect to see on the pitch, I grant you. But you've got to expect, with young lads, there's high spirits. Sometimes it can go to their heads. Or in this case, someone else's head. But, you know.
What's your sense of how people there in Central America are assessing what effect all this might have on the relationship between Washington and London?
Melanie, that's an interesting one. Earlier today, I was speaking to a man on a bike, and he told me that his mother had never even heard of...
Across parts of Northern Ireland and northwest England, and indeed we've got a severe breeze alert in force for those of you in high ground in these areas. So if you are thinking of...
It's going to come snorkelling in from the west, bringing with it wobbly spells with patches of shroudier weather before eventually snuffling its way out into some other direction.
So from what you're saying, you're pretty confident you can indemnify this charge?
Yeah, you know, I think the FA will see it our way, and if they don't, then we'll try to make them see it our way. But I think they'll see it our way.
When your lads set fire to the dressing room earlier in the season, it prompted rumours of something of a caveat within the club. So do you think this is a case of no smoke without a fire?
Oh, there was a fire.
Yes, but more
That's where the smoke was coming from.
Yes, but more generally, what would your thoughts be on that subject?
Well, you know, what happens in the dressing room stays in the dressing room. The exception to that was, of course, the fire, which, as we all know, spread to the clubhouse. But, you know,
I think I got maybe time for one more. Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Thank you. The New York Times this morning has the president quoted as saying that if necessary, we may have to put together, and I quote, a posse of guys with white hats to go over there and round them up. Wondered if you'd like to comment on what he may have meant by that.
Yeah, I don't want to really get into words at this point in time. President, he uses a bunch of words all the time, some more than others. Of course, you guys want a story, I understand that, but I think it was Mark Twain who said words are like peas. When you try and pin them down, they have a habit of sliding off the plate and under the
Deputy White House Press Secretary Lawrence Frenzel there. Those live pictures from the White House press conference, which is just finished as you saw there. Anthony, events clearly starting to move very quickly there now.
Julia, they are. And you know, the great thing about these press briefings is you don't have to listen to what the guy is saying. You just have to look at the number of microphones.
That's probably true.
Anything over 5 microphones, you got a serious situation.
You're watching IBS News with Julia Reagan and Anthony Markovitz.
Look out, we got a 7-microphone situation here.
We'll be right back with Senator Bob Sandusky and his thoughts on what we just heard there.
Anything over 10, everybody take cover now. We got incoming.
Plus, day 51 of the Peter Vicente murder trial. And we've got some great weather for you with Alicia.
New report suggesting that the nation's credit card debt may be even worse than we thought, which poses real questions about how it can be serviced.
It's just a classic case of cellar beware though, Mitchell. I mean, talk about being bitten by the bad sausage. They've gone out and targeted Joe Chav, sold him a glossy Burberry donut that's all whole and no custard. Now they're surprised that he's emptied his pockets and he's blowing his fluff to the wind. What did they expect? A Fabergé egg from a golden moose? They're talking Japanese to ring a turkey here, surely.
Boxing now, and the fighter they call the slow, relentless killer and the man they call the patient assassin finally met in a match-up build as the big night of the long fight. Unfortunately, it failed to live up to expectations, and the bout was over in just 33 seconds when the Croatian twisted his ankle on a slippery canvas, fell and broke his elbow.
Then we could see prices as high as £20 or £30 a litre much earlier than we thought possible, and that within a very few number of years' time it could actually be cheaper to buy a new car than to fill your existing car up with petrol.
In the meantime, one thing looks certain. Things are going to get a lot worse before they eventually get worse still. Richard Harbinger, PBS News, Central London.
Richard Harbinger there with
that report from Central. A quick look at the international pages.
Quick glance at the obituary.
A quick look at the crosswords.
But for the bigger picture, unique to ESN News, we can go live now to our reporter, Nick Burnham, who's embedded with the NASA Space Station programme. Nick, what's the reaction up there in space to the news that Bolivia may have nuclear weapons?
Well, Melanie, as you know, as I'm constantly reminded, I am the only civilian unskilled member of the crew. As a result, I'm left out of a lot of the operations on board. Almost everything, in fact, and I'm definitely not privy to military operations, which I suspect is what we could now be involved in up here.
Nick, are you able to give us any sense of what sort of military operations you're referring to there?
I did, of course, ask what was going on, but my colleagues said that if they told me, they'd have to kill me. Of course, I thought they were joking, but they made it very clear that they weren't.
How would you describe the mood on board today?
In a word, cold and hostile. Melanie.
Nick, thank you. Richard.
Melanie. Thank you. Melanie Bellamy there with the standing news. Coming up. Stay with us.
Still to come, a reminder of what's coming up later. That's still to come. But first, coming up.
Life is hard. So is our news. PBS News. For people who can handle the
New sex tape, this time with 3, count them, 3 guys.
That's the thing about Paris. Beautiful, but very dirty. And crowded.
Oh, yes.
And finally, Coldplay cancel their European tour as lead singer Chris Martin contracts jaundice.
He's all yellow.
Ba-dum-cha! You've got to be loving that.
I'm here all week. Step aside, Chris Rock. There's a new king of comedy.
But from the sublime to the ridiculous.
And what could be more ridiculous in the crazy world of LA? Or indeed the cake-faced loon that is Josh Cashman. Josh, hi.
Yeah, well, you can lick my pits and sniff my squeaky butt.
For local residents like Trisha Tunstall, wind farms like the one that would be behind me if it was here may represent the ultimate apotheosis. But if the government is to reach its target of generating 20% of the country's energy needs from non-practical sources by 2020, then it may be that in the end, her objections, like others like them, may simply be blown away. Nick Andrews for Lookout East, Shottisham.
Nick Andrews there with that report from Shottisham.
Very difficult subject.
My goodness, yes. Still, Russ is here with the weather prospects, aren't you, Russ?
I believe I am, Philip, yes.
So, will we be getting any wind this weekend?
No, well, no, not too bad this weekend, Philip. We're pretty confident we won't be getting any of the rain we've been forecasting all week.
Out on the golf course, I expect?
No, not this weekend, Philip, no.
Oh, you're not?
No, but at the old paintballing this weekend.
Paintballing?
Grief. Yes, once a year, a group of us get together and go into Rendlesham Forest and splatter the living daylights out of each other. Tremendous fun.
And what about Mrs. Russ? What does she make of it all?
Oh, well, she goes to stay with her sister in Northampton.
Ah, sensible girl.
Leaving young Russ here, footloose and fancy-free.
Now there's a frightening thought.
Lock up your daughters.
And your mothers, I would think.
Well, these days, as the Americans would say, in my dreams.
Oh, let's not go into Russ's dreams.
Please, God, don't go there.
Let's not, perhaps.
Too much.
So anyway, a bit cooler today then.
Well, indeed so, Sarah. In fact, the odd damp patch first thing this morning, but it soon...
I think the news that they have nuclear weapons is terrifying. I'm scared. I'm very, very scared. And everyone else should be too. That from Duncan in Stoke.
I don't care. Text Michelle. I'm moving to New Zealand. I'll be safe there.
Nuclear weapons don't kill people. People kill people. That's from Easy in Dallas.
The government should have seen this coming. Emails Todd. We should have bombed them years ago.
And that's about all we've got time for in tonight's World Money Today. Tonight, on an extraordinary day on Wall Street. My thanks to Tom Mitchell in New York. You're welcome. My apologies for not getting to you, Michelle Wong in Hong Kong.
No problem.
And you, Kyoko Ogura in Tokyo.
No problem.
And indeed you, Katrina Schultheis in Berlin.
You're welcome.
And apologies also for not talking to Johann Fleischer in Geneva. It's fine. Or Francis Xavier Menendez in Buenos Aires.
Not a problem.
Oh, and Todd Todmore in Johannesburg.
No worries.
And Brett McKenzie in Sydney.
Yeah.
Thanks to me, Dan Evans. Thanks. That's it. We're out of time.
We hear J.K. Rowling is over there in Hollywood.
Correct. JK, as close personal friends like me call her, is out here talking turkey about a new movie project. But you know what? She's got a stalker. Not that weird, you might think. After all, anyone who's anyone has a stalker. They're like totally de rigueur, right? But here's the weird thing. Her stalker is 6 years old. I know, it's like totally bizarro, Jerry.
A 6-year-old? So how does that work?
Well, it's the strangest thing.
I'm from Bolivia, and I think it's a good thing that we have nuclear weapons. Maybe now people will start taking Bolivia seriously. That's from Roger in Kent.
Here we go again.
Increasingly likely result that we'll see the French imposing some tariffs on our key exports.
I love stories like this, Mitchell. I mean, this is snotty kids in the playground going high on the Chinese burns behind the sandpit, isn't it? I think they should settle things like this with a war. Let's see who's got the concrete trousers then. Well, I'm only messing with you, Mitchell. What are the domestic economic implications?
Well, now that's a good question.
Discovered a pigeon nesting in one of the pockets. Unusual.
Yep. Golf now, and unexpected trouble for Miguel Jimenez in the Bell Canadian Open when his tee shot at the fourth veered beyond the rough and into the trees. Shocked spectators could only look on in disbelief as Jimenez, preparing his approach shot, was suddenly attacked by a bear. The bear, known locally as...
No way of saying if they have them or not, but if they have, then the chances are that this is what they would look like, though many observers think that's highly unlikely.
But make the most of it whilst you can, because you won't last, and the reason for that is...
High ground warning for areas such as the Pennines and the Yorkshire...
Look forward at yesterday's horoscopes.
Most of the roundup of today's Sudoku, and most of them...
It's the kid I feel sorry for. What kind of a life has he had to be that messed up? He must be seriously deranged! You know, you wonder if he could be a danger to himself.
Is that a concern? Are the police worried about that?
Oh, sure. He's 6 years old! What's he gonna do? Give himself a wedgie? Wet his pants?
If a country has nuclear weapons, that's their business. How would we like it if Bolivia told us we weren't allowed to have football? We wouldn't. It's an interesting point from Chris.
Yeah. When are we going to...
More later on those beauty pageant beheadings in Florida.
Plus the story of a Bakersfield woman who fell 11 stories out of her office window and died.
It's 20 after 5.
JK is said to be very concerned, and no wonder. This is very, very serious. If this kid managed to get into her home here, he could very easily eat all her cookies. Ah!